Good morning, everyone. Good morning from Annapolis. We are beginning our Howard County delegation meeting of January 25th. And first item on the agenda is Howard County 1523, which is Senator Hester's bill. And I believe Senator Hester is with us. She was just going to give us a brief update. And I believe also that there may be some guests here to answer any questions from DNR. Senator Hester, are you with us?
Well, I just wanted to give this group a brief summary of where we landed after our work group last week. 2 seconds. So basically, just to refresh everybody's memory, Howard County has a deer management problem. We introduced this bill to help deal with not only the resulting vehicle collisions, but also the Lyme disease, which deer are a contributing factor to. And as currently amended, 1523 would amend Howard County's bow hunting regulations to match those of several neighboring counties from 150 to 50 yards. Last Friday, there was a subset of us that spent an hour talking to the county, and as a result of answering numerous questions and providing some data, there's now a lot more information for everybody available on the Google Drive. There are 10 years of hunting data incident reports, all involving hunters, no actual bystanders. And today we have Brian Ehler from the Department of Natural Resources and Paul Pedito, Associate Director of Wildlife Heritage Services, who can answer some questions about that data if anybody has any. Then there were 2 sets of questions answered by Howard County staff. The first set of questions provides additional detail on Lyme disease, archery requirements based on population or land use, birth control, the sharpshooter program, and the size of the land that would be managed and how much that would increase. So that's the first set of Q&As that we answered. The second set of questions talks about the requirements to participate in the Howard County program for deer management, the state safety requirements for all archery hunting, the clarification of elevated positions, which we discussed at length, and crop damage permits. So if you haven't had a chance to look at all the questions and answers, I really would appreciate that before the next meeting where we discuss this bill again in detail. So I guess with that, I could turn it over to the state folks who I'm happy to have join us. Does anybody have any questions for either Paul Pedito or Brian Ehler?
Would you mind having them introduce themselves and tell us what they do?
That would be great. Either one of you can go first.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Hester and delegation members. My name is Paul Pedito. I'm the director of the Wildlife and Heritage Service for Maryland DNR. And I came up through the agency 29 years ago as a biologist and ran our deer project for a while, and am intimately familiar with the issues you're dealing with and frankly, the issues that most of our more suburban counties are dealing with as it relates to deer.
And I'm Brian Ehler. I'm one of the associate directors under Paul, and I've been with the department over 20 years. And for most of that time, I was a deer biologist or deer project leader for the department. And I've worked closely with Tim Maynard and predecessors over the years in Howard County and a lot of the other urban counties as well on deer management.
Great, thank you. Senator Hester.
I will defer to other folks, but I think since we've got DNR here and all the hunter safety data comes from them, I think if they gave us a very high level overview, that would be incredibly helpful.
Perfect.
And I see that Delegate Terraza has her hand up also.
Okay, let's get the overview of the deer hunter safety, and then we'll go to Terraza.
Sure. So you have what I believe is probably the links to the last 20 years worth of hunting accident reports. And as Senator Hester said, almost all and these are, really single digit annual events, which is the good news. We'd love to have 0. all of them involve what we call self-inflicted. So, and the vast majority of those are hunters who are injured during the hunt, and typically by not wearing their harnesses and in their tree stands, or stumbling. Again, though, we're talking statewide, 100,000 hunters, many person days in the field. And, we end up with a small number of these in the, sort of in the grand history of Maryland, regulated hunting. We've never had a hunter shoot and kill a bystander, as it's often characterized. Folks tend to sort of flash back to a fairly famous incident that occurred in the 70s in Maine, and that gets commingled with all the other states, but that didn't happen here. I'm well aware of the incident that took place with the daycare facility in Howard County, but they broke the rules that day, and fortunately, nothing really bad happened. But at the end of the day, we have safeguards in place, and I'll just say this in general. This is the safety zone. This buffer zone reduction has been in place in a number of other counties for many years, and it hasn't increased either the number of calls we deal with or the incidents that are sort of born of that activity.
And just to clarify for the public, Senator Hester, the buffer zone decrease is applying, the law proposes is applying to archery, not guns.
That is correct.
Does the state have anything else to add, Brian? Okay. Senator Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the data that you're offering, and I'm glad to hear there's not more incidents of serious injury. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about what information is tracked. Are close calls like the thing that, so nobody was injured in the daycare incident where the bullet went into the window of a daycare, but it certainly was concerning, and we changed from 50 to 150 yards at that time. And I realize that's guns, but my understanding is bows go significantly further than the 50 yards. Maybe they shouldn't go more than that, and maybe that's not what's ideal in hunting, but they do go that far. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what you track. Do you track those types of close calls? Do you track injuries to domestic animals, for example? I've heard of a number of incidents where people's animals have been shot. And I'm wondering if you could speak to whether that's something you track.
And can I just clarify here, we're talking only about archery, bows and arrows, not guns. So can you limit your responses, DNR, to this legislation?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Delegate, for the question. So we track any reports on a daily basis of someone who believes that illegal hunting activity during our archery seasons is occurring, or someone is reporting what they believe to be an incident, a serious incident involving, in this case, archery hunters. All of those require response from our dispatch center. We have a like your law enforcement agency and the state police, we have a 24/7 staff dispatch center. So if someone calls in and says, there's a domestic animal outside and we think it was just shot with a bow, we absolutely respond, and that is recorded in our computer-aided dispatch system. If it's established that occurred as a result of a hunting incident, so it wasn't, for lack of a better phrase, sort of neighborhood hoodlums who weren't hunting, they weren't in the act of hunting, then it's tracked and it's recorded. That Howard County incident, pardon me, Madam Chair, that was firearms, but that is in that database. If you walk back through it, you'll find it in there because that was a hunting incident. So all of these are tracked. I'll say this again, I've been doing this 30 years, 20 plus as director. And in those rare instances where an animal is unfortunately shot, almost all of those are the result of bad actors who were not hunting. These are after dark, people doing really just stupid things that happen to result in, another stupid decision. So, and there's laws against that too.
So do you have records of how many domestic animals have been shot?
It is, I couldn't find one in the data that exists. We talked to the second in command right now, who's been around as long as I have, and he said, I can't think of one in the last decade that we concluded was the result of hunting incident.
Do you have a sense of how many have been reported that have been decided that they weren't as a result of hunting?
Not as a result of the use of archery equipment. I can recall there was an incident in a highly developed area in Baltimore County that they absolutely concluded was again just bad actors making bad decisions unrelated to hunting.
Just clarify that point. So we are talking about, I guess what our conversation is about is what are the hunting regulations in Howard County with regard to archery. So there could be people who have hurt or killed animals that are not following the hunting laws, is what you're saying. So, what we're trying to look at is not every crime that is committed out there outside of the hunting regulations, but what should the hunting regulations be, which have proven over time to be quite safe in Howard County. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess if the question's for me, I get it that not everybody, sort of likes hunting, but it is incredibly safe as an activity. Hunters aren't out there, frankly, even looking for the, if an archery hunter sees a domestic animal, frankly, they don't want it there. They're not going to shoot it. They would prefer the domestic animal be, not be in a place where coyotes could eat it. So, the hunting community is not, they're just not focused on that. It's just not how they behave, I guess. And that's a broad sweeping statement, but I've been doing this a long time. And
it's not just a statement, but it is the data that shows that.
Well, okay.
True. I guess the one thing I would say is if there were lots of domestic animals being shot by hunters, we would have that data. If I had a domestic animal that was shot by a hunter, or I believed it was shot by a hunter, I would report it and we would record it. And the data don't have, there's no data that supports that it happens a lot.
We move to Delegate Feldmark.
I'm sorry, I'd like to follow up on my question. You asked a bunch of follow-up questions on that, and I'd like to follow up on what I was asking.
Go ahead, and then we're going to move to Delegate Feldmark quickly.
Okay, so I'm still not clear as to what the data is in terms of reported close incidents. And I understand what you're saying about bad actors, but you're calling the person who shot into a daycare accidentally a bad actor. And we didn't consider him a bad actor. And we changed the law so that we could protect daycares from getting accidentally hit with bullets. So I just want to be clear on what are the reported incidents, because I know on my committee, I'm on environment and transportation, we've heard reports of people's animals. And I'm not suggesting anybody is intentionally shooting a domestic animal. I can't imagine why a hunter would want to do that. I wouldn't expect it. I don't imagine, but the concern is that they might be confused or they might be unintentionally injured. And I have heard reports that I've been told have been sent to DNR. And so I guess I just like to, maybe before the next meeting, you could give us any specifics you have about some of those reports and what's been concluded or how many close calls you've had, because we've also heard in my committee reports of arrows landing in people's driveways. And And I hear what you're saying, like some of that's not hunters, but I just want us to make sure, I agree that deer are a huge problem. But I want to make sure we're keeping people safe.
And if I could, Madam Chair, very quickly, the simple answer is the daycare incident clearly involved hunters because when they were stopped in the field, they were in the act of hunting. They had hunting gear with them. They admitted that they were hunting. Someone at 2 o'clock in the morning driving around with a crossbow in their vehicle. And we established that they, based on the interview and based on the data that's presented to the officer at the time, these people were clearly not hunting, and an arrow ends up in someone's yard. It still gets reported, but it doesn't get reported as a hunting accident.
Okay, and so do you have that data that you could share with us?
It's going to be hard to tease out every one of those contacts where somebody called and said, I saw somebody drive by and I think they have a crossbow in their vehicle and I think they may have shot into our yard. You're talking about thousands and thousands of data points, even on a monthly basis.
Do you get thousands of those kinds of reports?
No, we get thousands of reports of people who believe that somebody might be on their property or that their neighbor is hunting and they don't know that that's legal. Most of the time, it's really they're calling us to triage the right answer. And almost always these are people who are doing something that's completely legal. And that's why what you have in front of you is a handful of incidents across decades of hunting opportunity.
Delegate Traza, do you have any specifics that you can provide to DNR about these alleged incidents?
Yes, I can follow up with the details.
Yeah, if you have specific incidents, then they can give you the information, I'm sure, on those specific incidents.
Right, but I was just looking for any data that we had about those near misses.
And I think your question has been answered. Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guests from DNR and our guests from Rec and Parks who spent extra time with us last week. I really appreciate the time you're putting into this. I guess, from my perspective, I'm glad, certainly glad that we have this minimal history of hunting incidents. And I think it's important to recognize that history is with a safety zone of 150 yards, right? So one could argue that the safety zone we have in place is working well at keeping the number of incidents down. And so I don't think we should take a low number of incidents at 150-yard safety zone as an indicator that it's time to decrease the safety zone. I appreciate the sponsor's intent with this bill to address our deer population issue. And I think that addressing our deer population issue is something we need to do. I am not convinced that decreasing a safety zone is the appropriate way to approach this issue. And I think we started to have a little bit of conversation about expanding the managed hunt, expanding the sharpshooter program, even raised the question of, is there a bow hunting equivalency or counterpart to the sharpshooter program where there's a sort of highly skilled, qualified hunter in a tightly regulated context where we can really more efficiently reach a larger number of deer. So I guess I would like to hear thoughts on those approaches. What can we do to, I think, I believe, and I don't remember exactly the months involved, but I believe the managed hunt is only during certain months. The sharpshooter is only during certain months. Are we able to adjust those regulations so we could, extend the timing? I think we should be looking at those types of options as well, which don't necessarily mean we're cutting away at the safety zone, which historically the data suggests has served us very well.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, am I answering a question there?
Thank you for that question.
For
Delegate
Parks. Yeah.
Delegate Feldmark is asking if there are alternate methods for achieving the same goal, which
Specifically expanding the managed hunt, expanding the sharpshooter program, looking at if there's a corollary to the sharpshooter program for a bow hunting option where we have folks who are, clearly skilled and qualified and screened and shooting in appropriate areas.
And I think it's the county that probably should answer that question. Paul, am I correct on that, or would you like to answer it?
I could give you a brief
Okay,
response
ahead.
based on a lot of time spent dealing with all the other counties, in particular Montgomery was in this many years ago. So we've plowed a lot of this ground. The simple answer is yes, sort of, right? So you could expand your managed hunt program as it exists today, but you're going to have to, that's limited to those public lands that the county manages, which means, I think the data are somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 50 deer are taken during the managed hunts by archery hunters. Over 1,000 deer are taken by your regular archery hunters on those private lands that exist in the county. And that's because across the state, 75 to 80% of our deer are taken on private land. You have, the county is wonderful because it has a lot of open space and preserved land, but you're still going to be running up against that buffer when you get into those more sort of developed areas. The sharpshooter programs in all of the sort of suburban counties exist and they work, but and yours is a little bit different because it's staff time, but on average you're talking $500 a deer from field to table. So you could grow that, but again, you still need access to those private lands. So you're limited to your ability to kill those deer. I can't issue a permit for sharpshooting on somebody's land that doesn't want the county sharpshooters there. And most people just don't know how much it costs to do this. So
Mr. Petito, let me thank you for that answer. And let me just follow up with one thing that Delegate Feldmark said that I just want to have you clarify. The safety zone that we have is larger than the safety zone in Montgomery County, correct?
it is now, as of probably about 4 years ago.
Okay, so the data, one of her points was that we were comparing apples and oranges basically, but the data that you're talking about does include counties with a 50-yard safety zone, correct?
Correct.
So I just wanted to make that point. Delia Feldmark?
Okay, yeah, just to follow up, I mean, I think, the notion that the only way we can address deer on private property is with just, wide open hunting, I think is maybe not fully exploring the options, right? I think there are possibilities for partnering with private property owners to have a more highly regulated process on private lands. I think that's something we probably should be looking at. I think, and to the data, I also do, looking at the list of counties, I mean, with the exception of Montgomery County, which I don't know, what the rules within Montgomery County are about hunting in different areas of Montgomery County, because Montgomery County is very diverse in its land use and population density, right? But for the most part, that list of counties is the more rural counties. And so I do think, the other sort of major, more densely populated suburban counties are still, for the most part, at a larger safety zone. And I think that's important to recognize.
Do you have any response to that, Mr. Petito?
I mean, to the first part, I absolutely agree. I think you need a full suite of options. And to the county's credit, you do that, right? You're sort of deploying all of the various tools and you're using them where they're appropriate. And I think it's still a landowner's decision, even if you reduce the buffer zone. it's still a landowner's decision if they want hunters there. Our perspective is we've thrown the kitchen sink at deer management in Maryland. We do things that frankly, my peers in the Northeast look at us, I can't believe you even try those ideas like immunocontraception and live sterilization of deer. Setting aside the cost of those programs, we have a full suite of tools that are deployed, and you have a great team at the county that are doing that work on a local level. For this, all of this is, it's another option that a landowner might avail themselves of. Not all of them will, but some might. And we, we're the one that is really the tip of the spear when people call and they say, look, I have too many deer. What are you going to do about them? And that is a daily conversation for us in areas like Howard County.
We're going to do this now. I'm going to go to Tim Maynard briefly and then Ziegler and then wrap it up with Senator Hester for today.
So just to touch on some of the things that Paul also mentioned, currently the Howard County Managed Hunt Program, which Delegate Feldmark made mention of expanding, we cannot currently expand based on the current safety zone of 150 yards. We're literally managing all the properties inside of recreation parks that we can legally manage based on that safety zone. The 150-yard safety zone is still a Maryland state law that we have to follow. So reduction of the 50 yards to 50 yards would allow us to get into these other smaller areas owned by the county and conduct more management. That's the biggest thing that, or the biggest, the good thing that would come out of this.
And I'm sorry I just wanted to clarify. I understand we can't expand physically because you're hunting all the physical territory you can cover under the existing safety zones. But are there options for expanding it in terms of timing, right? I mean, could you be doing more days of hunting, in terms of expanding the program, not necessarily expanding the footprint?
I'm sorry, could you clarify your question again?
So I'm not referring to expanding the physical footprint of the hunted area because I recognize you're up against the safety zones currently and you're hunting everywhere you can. But you could still potentially, I don't see why you couldn't expand the program in terms of the number of days that folks are out hunting in the managed hunt or something like that. And if there are regulations at the state level that limit you, should we be looking at adjusting those either instead of or in addition to looking at possibly adjusting the safety zone?
So in regards to timing and allowing more time and more days to conduct those management efforts, this year we conducted 34 managed hunt efforts in the state. We were doing roughly 3 to 4 a week. We don't hunt on the weekends because obviously that's when we have the most park usage. And it does take a lot of time and staff to organize these. But again, the areas that we want to get into to conduct management, we can't because of the buffer zone, and we can't even with sharpshooting because of that 150 yard buffer zone. So I mean, I would love to hunt more. And do more managed hunts, but we just can't right now. We're literally doing as much as we can on the space that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Ms. Ziegler, and then we'll go to Senator Hester.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Mr. Perdito and Mr. Maynard, for your time. I do really appreciate it. Could you clarify for me, is there any exemption to the 150-yard rule for farmers with crop damage permits or farmers trying to control damage to their crops?
There is not. No, it's the statute doesn't give us any flexibility there.
Thank you.
That's an interesting question. Senator Hester, how would you like to proceed?
Thank you. And Natalie teed me up. I was going to suggest that, this is a countywide problem. And, I really appreciate the various ideas that we've had. And I think people should come next week with actual text for amendments. So for example, Delegate Feldmark, if you think that the sharpshooter program is the way to go, maybe we should have an amendment that would allow on county lands for the sharpshooter program to be active at less than 50, at less than 100 and move it to 50. Maybe we should move the goalpost on the sharpshooter program, because as Tim said, there are the deer are hanging out in certain urban areas and we can't get into those areas. The two other amendments that I am having drafted, hold on. I was thinking we should look at specific language around reducing the bow hunting safety zone for individuals with crop damage permits, exactly what Natalie just said. That would help in the rural West. The other amendment that I'm trying to have drafted is to focus our urban bow hunting safety zone only for hunters participating in the county's managed hunt program. So it wouldn't apply to everybody, just when the county safety restrictions apply. So those are three different potential amendments. And I think really in order to move this dialogue forward, we should all think about what we prefer, come forward next week with concrete amendments, and then discuss those amendments.
I think that sounds like a good plan. And I think people should be prepared to take a vote next week on this unless we get into amendments that need more work. But we've spent a good amount of time on this, and I'm asking everyone to do their homework and come prepared next week to either make a decision or get close to a decision about where we want to go with this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Co-Chair Lamb.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Delegate Hill, did not see your hand. Go ahead, please.
Fine. Gentlemen, Mr. Maynard, I know you all gave us a map at the beginning that kind of showed the areas that would be affected, but I would really like, particularly where we're talking about the more densely populated areas. I think, Tim, at some point you mentioned the Dorsey search area. Is it possible for you to have a more detailed map of what communities, not on private, because it's not the private land you're talking about, but exactly where you're saying this bill would allow more harvesting of deer? I'd like to see what neighborhoods we're talking about so I can visualize how close to those homes you would plan on your.
And you mean on public land, right, Delegate Hill?
Because all this only affects public land. What I'm hearing is that anything on private land has to be negotiated, which I also take to mean that if I have private land and I agree to let you on, I could tell you, I don't want you to be as close as 50 yards. I want you to stay at the 150. If that's correct, that as on private land, I get to dictate.
Yes, that is correct. I just was clarifying for the public.
Right.
The other thing, quick clarification on that. You can already hunt within 150 yards if you have permission of the occupant of the building within which you're 150 yards of, right? So it's not that this can't happen anywhere. It's just you need permission of the person whose safety zone you're encroaching in, right? Can someone please confirm that?
That's
That is
correct.
correct, Delegate.
Okay, thank you.
And in wrapping this up, could I please ask our Howard County Administrator, Abby, to send out all of the Q&As that are available on the drive, but one more time, would you please send out the original presentation and the questions and answers that have been provided to every member of the delegation so they have it fresh at the top of their email inbox to take a look at again. And thank you, everyone. Senator Lamb.
All right, thank you. And thank you to the representatives from DNR for being here this morning. We're going to move on the agenda. Next on the agenda are campaign finance bills. The next bill up is Howard County 7-23. This is Canvas Village Board or Columbia Council in the Village of Columbia. And this is sponsored by Delegate Ferraza. I understand that Delegate Ferraza has some amendments. Delegate Ferraza, would you like to go ahead and introduce and speak to the amendments?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to them. I sent them out, I believe, last night. We're still working on another amendment. I told that to Delegate Watson last night, but there's one that, and I think I spoke to these being what they would be. There's one that, just a second, I'm trying to find the language right in front of me, but there's one that speaks to is a notwithstanding clause, just to make sure, according to the drafters and DLS, our laws go into effect notwithstanding covenants and other documents, CA documents, but we had a constituent request that be clarified or specified, and DLS didn't see a harm in that, so they put that in. The second one is for reporting that the village board has to, the bill says they either have to make the report available or post it, and I just changed that to and post it. And then the third one, I'm trying to find the language for that, but says it's within the exclusive authority of the villages whether to seat someone, because there was some concern expressed when I went to the villages that despite their desire to seat somebody and the person meeting their requirements, some technicality would keep perhaps the CA board from letting them be seated. So village elections are already within the village's purview, and so that just clarifies that. So those are the three amendments I have right now, but I'm still working on one as it relates to independent expenditures.
Any questions from delegation on those amendments? Doug Feldmar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Delegate, can you please just clarify the piece about the village board deciding who seats someone if there's an issue
Sorry.
with the Columbia Council not seating the member as a board member? Is that what you're?
No, the
Can
concern.
you explain that, please?
Yes. So as you know, I don't know how many are familiar with it, but the village elects somebody to sit on the Columbia Council. The Columbia Council is then sworn in, and then they appoint themselves to be the board of directors. There was a concern that maybe the village didn't post it quickly enough, or or there was some other technicality, or that despite the village concluding that the report was sufficient, that perhaps the CA board might decide that that had not been satisfied. But that's always been within the purview of the village and would stay there. And I don't think we're voting on this today, so I'm happy to talk to you more offline about it, but I don't know if I answered your question. I see another question.
So a quick follow-up on that. So this would touch on, so this legislation would also impose the requirement on the villages then, right? Based on that amendment?
So
But the village would not.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, there's no additional requirement on the villages in this amendment. The requirement was already that they post, they either post or make I guess that's an additional requirement. They either post or either post or make available. This would say they had to do both, but the third amendment doesn't impose any additional requirements. It just specifies their role as it is now.
But it says only a village association can refuse to seat someone, right? So it would be a restriction on them that they would.
So it says they can seat them, and they're the only ones who can seat them. There's no restriction on the village whatsoever on that. I mean, I'm not sure I understand how you see this as a restriction on the villages. This is just clarifying that, I mean, the village is the one that, Jessica looks confused, so maybe I'll talk to her offline, but and make sure we have that language clear. But it was just to make sure that nobody else can enforce it. It's basically, the way this is enforced is a village, if the person doesn't file the report, they don't seat the person, and they're gonna put in specified rules and regulations regarding that. And so once they're satisfied, they go ahead and seat the person.
I mean, I guess I was just trying to get a clarification, because to me, initially the bill really pertained to Columbia Association, and this it seems like by extension here with some of these amendments also now impose elements of the bill on the villages.
Yeah, there's no additional requirement on the villages in this. I'm happy to not do the
Sure.
third one, but what basically the villages were concerned, there were some villages who expressed concern that they would go ahead and say, okay, the person can be seated, and then somehow the larger CA would say, no, you haven't followed this rule, so we're not going to seat you. This
Let
is,
me-
I mean, if
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead,
Chair,
go ahead, Delegate Hill.
Thank you.
Delegate Hill.
I want to be clear, Senator, Mr. Chair, I think you're asking if this and somehow affects and whether the intention of the bill or of the amendments is to not simply affect who is voted on for the council, but whether village board members are also impacted. Is that when you say affecting the villages, are you talking about people running just for the village board? And because my understanding is that it's about who's running for the council rep. And the third amendment basically says that the determination of whether donation filing has been appropriately filed is solely at the village board's discretion. If there are other requirements to be on the council, other than disbursement, donation, report filing, that someone else, including the council, would have authority over, that's not affected, but it's just saying as far as what this bill is talking about, the determination of whether those reports are properly made is the village board's discretion. Is that?
Are you asking me the question or?
I'm asking both of you. I want to make sure I understand.
I mean, this already
your
applies,
question.
the bill as drafted applies to both village board and to the Columbia Council rep. They're both elected in the same election in the same way. This does not change any of that. If that language in the third amendment is concerning to people, we don't need to do it. It was just merely a protection for the villages. It is not expanding any obligation on the part of the villages whatsoever. But if you have concerns about that, I'm happy to either discuss or not introduce that amendment.
I mean, I don't think it's a matter of
Just a
either or,
protection.
because I think the purpose of the amendment is correct, to make sure of who the authority is to determine whether that requirement has been met. I think that's fine. I think the discussion is whether there's a better way that it should be worded, and apparently.
I'm happy to work on phrasing with whoever wants to, if that's the concern also. This was just merely at the request of some of the villages who were concerned, that might become an issue in terms of who is allowed to take office in the Columbia Council and then appoint themselves board of directors. It may not be artfully drafted if that is a concern to you all. I certainly don't intend to confuse or add any additional requirement on the villages whatsoever. It was at the request of a number of the villages.
So can council weigh in, Mr. Chair, and in terms of the question you had about the way it's written?
I have not seen the text of these amendments yet. They're not sent to me. I'm not sure it's proper for me to speak on them, and I haven't seen the language in them.
So I'm happy to, if Senator Lamb, if you have questions about the phrasing of it, or Senator Delegate Feldmark, Delegate Hill, anyone else, either connect you with the drafter who is working on this, or answer your questions if you want to send them to me in writing or tell me them on the phone. Again, this was really just supposed to be protective. It was not supposed to protective of what already happens. It was not intended to change anybody's rights or responsibilities, or certainly not an additional. This is absolutely not intended to be any additional burden on the villages whatsoever.
Okay, Delegate Feldmark.
So just to see if I understand correctly, Delegate Terrassa, it sounds like currently villages manage the election process and are responsible for seating the Columbia Council member that their village has elected.
Right.
And if I understand correctly, you want to make sure that establishing these requirements does not give any other individual or entity the ability to challenge the village's authority to seat their Columbia Council member. Is that
That is
correct?
very well stated.
Okay.
Okay, that's helpful. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, the House is going to need to proceed to the floor. So I think we need to stop here, but I would suggest to Mr. Chair that when we start next week at 8:30, we begin with the education bills that we have not been able to address so far this session, and then we move to the other bills that we have been discussing.
Okay.
Senator Hester has her hand up.
Go ahead, Senator Hester.
I mean, given that the burden of proof bill was voted on nearly unanimously last year, or unanimously, I can't remember. I mean, I hate to wait another week because it's got to go through the House and the Senate. Are
you making a motion?
I'm looking for a cue if I should make a motion.
What's the motion?
The motion would be that we actually move favorable on the burden of proof bill.
Second. Oh, sorry.
There are many of us that were on the delegation last year, but there are also a few new folks, and I want to make sure that they feel comfortable proceeding to a vote on this right away without an opportunity for further discussion.
I'm moving it, don't we open it up for discussion so they can ask questions?
That's true. There was a move and a second. So for any discussion, particularly for the new folks that have not had an opportunity to discuss this before. Does not look like that's the case. Okay. So there's a motion to take a vote, properly seconded. If there are no objections, seeing none, if we can have Abby call the roll.
Sure. Senator Lamb,
Yes.
Delegate Watson,
Yes.
Senator Gazzoni, Senator Hester,
Yes.
Delegate Atterbury,
Yes.
Delegate Feldmark,
Yes.
Delegate Landman Gazzoni,
Yes.
Delegate Hill,
Yes.
Delegate Terraza,
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Delegate Wu,
Yes.
Delegate Ziegler,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So we will put together a delegation letter of support for that bill. I know we have to adjourn now so that we can all get to the floor. Seeing no objections to adjourning now, we will